Welcome to the very first episode of our brand new podcast, Raw and Rory,
with Sarah
and Tori.
Today's topic follows a social justice movement that hasn't gotten as much recognition as other pivotal developments in society, the pansy craze. We welcome all new listeners to tune in and come along with us as we retell the story of this community.
Now let's get started with this mystery in history.
By the 1920s and early 30s, America had found itself in a time known as the pansy craze, where the nation experienced a sudden rise in queer performances, especially in nightclubs.
And despite how whimsical that sounds, this was actually a serious cultural moment. The pansy craze refers to a burst of visibility for queer performers, especially drag and gender nonconforming entertainers, in American nightlife during the late 1920s and early 1930s, right in the middle of Prohibition.
Picture smoky speakeasies in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, illegal alcohol flowing, jazz in the background, and on stage, performers who openly bent gender rules in ways that shocked and fascinated audiences. What's wild is that these crowds weren't just queer folks. A lot of them were actually straight middle-class patrons looking for something daring.
And one name comes up again and again: Jean Malin. He was an MC and performer often called the Queen of the Pansy Craze. Malin usually wore tuxedos instead of dresses, leaning into an openly effeminate style. He was wisecracking, glamorous, and unapologetically queer.
Malin headlined major clubs like the Club Abbey in New York, and for a brief moment, that kind of visibility was almost mainstream. Newspapers covered these acts, and trade magazines talked about them. It wasn't hidden, it was nightlife's main attraction.
But that visibility came with a risk. Police raids were a constant threat. Clubs featuring pansy performers were frequently targeted under morality laws. There were nights when officers shut venues down mid-show, sometimes padlocking the doors afterward. One raid in the early 1930s forced several major performers to leave New York entirely to find work elsewhere.
And these raids weren't random. As the Great Depression set in, public pressure grew to clean up cities, and queer life became an easy target. Police crackdowns increased, and performers who had been celebrated just months earlier suddenly found themselves banned or surveilled.
The impact went beyond clubs. The end of Prohibition in 1933 completely changed the rules, literally. Alcohol can now be served legally, but only in respectable establishments. That definition excluded queer spaces almost by default, added new film and theater censorship rules, and queer representation disappeared from mainstream culture almost overnight.
So, the pansy craze burned bright, and then it burned out fast.
But here's the important part. Even though the craze ended, it mattered. Historians argue it expanded what Americans thought was possible, especially around masculinity, performance, and public identity. It showed that queer culture could be visible, popular, and commercially successful, even if only briefly.
And it laid the groundwork. Decades later, when queer performers re-emerged in theater, film, and music, they weren't starting from nothing. They were picking up a thread that had already existed, one that had been cut short, not erased.
So when people say LGBTQ history began much later, the pansy craze reminds us that there was an earlier chapter full of glamour, danger, police raids, courage, and a whole lot of wit.
With today's episode, we've hoped that we've reached our audience and truly showed the resilience of the LGBTQ community.
And I guess that's a wrap. Make sure to tune in next time on Raw and Rory.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Tori. And we'll see you next time.